meeting last month, we conducted a short survey of board members to get an idea of where they saw their own businesses trending as we head into 2022. Some of the interesting results of those surveys were that more than 80% of the respondents reported that they currently have the same or more employees compared to January 2020, which of course is pre-COVID. 56% of the respondents reported that their revenue in 2021 is up compared to pre-COVID. Last year, that number was only 22%. So again, 56% this year reported revenue is up in 21. Last year, the number was only 22%. And then looking ahead to next year, about 50% expected employment and capital investment to be up in 2022 compared to 21. Again, that's 50%. Now that's even more companies, 65% expect revenue to increase this next year. So more employment or the same capital investment, and 65% expect revenue to increase next year. So there's a lot of optimism and evidence that our local and regional economy will continue to grow moving into next year. So now let's turn our attention to workforce trends with our next expert. Dr. Eric Thompson serves as the Director of Bureau of Business Research at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and is the Carl H. Nelson Associate Professor of Economics. His research examines the sources and consequences of state and local economic growth and the economics of infrastructure. Through his work, Thompson provides economists with practical opportunities to conduct applied economic research, and he trains economists and business students to conduct applied research on timely economic and business topics. Over the past year, the Chamber has partnered with the Bureau of Business Research and Dr. Thompson to examine characteristics of workers that were displaced as a result of COVID and provide projections related to the region's economic recovery. Dr. Thompson, great to see you again. We're excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm pleased to make a presentation today and share with you some of our results regarding the labor market and projections for the labor market. So I'm going to summarize what we found in this PowerPoint presentation. Excuse me, I'm having, okay, there we go. I got it full screen now. So we're going to look at skill shortages in the Omaha area, looking both at long-standing challenges, because this is an issue we've been looking at over the last decade, but also the cyclical factors related to the recent recession and COVID pandemic. Start with those long-standing challenges and then move forward to the cyclical factors and the projections about talent availability. So there have been some long-standing skills gap for the Omaha area and really just the Nebraska economy. Even before the recent recession, with the onset of the pandemic, we were doing monthly surveys of Nebraska business, and we'd ask them, what's the top issue facing your business? And even back then, we'd get 15 to 25% of businesses saying the availability of labor, sometimes the quality of labor, was their top business issue. So this is something that Omaha and Nebraska has been dealing with for a long time. We also had a special study we did with the Nebraska Department of Labor to look at the skills gap in the Omaha area. The surveys were done in late 2017. The report was written in 2018. So here's some key findings from that study, just kind of show the long run challenges with skills gap in our area. The first two numbers really just show the balance of workers, which itself is an issue. And you can see that Omaha typically had about 4,000 more net job openings than it had annual entrants to the labor force in a typical year. So it was a struggle in general to find workers. And of course, for skilled workers, it could be even more challenging. One other thing that we noted in our survey is a significant number of businesses had a lot of applicants or reported a lot of applicants that were difficult to hire because of things like a poor work history, sort of a failure to get along at work, a lot of job hopping, things of that nature, or just literally couldn't pass a background check. And that became important with a lot of skilled jobs, because there could be workers that have the experience, that have the training, that have the skills in that sense. But it was sometimes the case that employers still couldn't hire them because of these poor work history issues. So a general insufficient of new people joining the labor force, compounded with some of these additional challenges, even before the pandemic, created some challenges for hiring in the Omaha area. Of course, there were some notable occupations with a skills gap. Some of these are listed here. It ranged from white collar to blue collar occupations, computer programmers and software developers, registered nurses, carpenters, machinists, welders. I guess the theme there is skilled blue collar workers. Truck and tractor trailer drivers were all difficult to find. So this is the environment, a strong labor market in a lot of ways, a good workforce in many ways, but there were some skills gaps even before the onset of the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic created additional factors, and I'd like to talk about that in a little more detail now. One perspective here is to compare the drop in labor force participation that we've seen with the onset, with the current recession versus the last recession we had, the Great Recession of April 2007, late 2007 through June 2009. And you can see that we had a similar drop in labor force participation after that recession. However, it is a little worse this time. So that's just been a characteristic of recessions the last 20 years, that in addition to all the other challenges, labor force participation seems to drop and not recover, at least quickly, in the period after the recession ends. Now, what is happening here in these recent recessions? I think what we're seeing is a combination of two things. We're in a period where the baby boom generation is increasingly retiring. It's long been thought, at least among economists, that this retirement would lead to a steady decline in the labor force participation rate in the country. What we've actually seen instead is sort of a cyclical decline. So there's sharp declines during and in the period after recessions, and then stability during the recovery period. So it's like, instead of having a steady decline, we're seeing severe decline around the time of recession periods. So that may be what we're experiencing here. We essentially had the next few years worth of drop in labor force participation all of a sudden in the period after the recession. Now, we do think there'll be some recovery in the labor force participation rate, but some of it will be permanent based on these long-run demographic trends like the retirement of the baby boom generation. It does seem worse this time. We did show that the numbers worse. The decline in labor force participation was more severe in the COVID-19 recession than in the Great Recession. So what are some of the factors that are making it even more challenging during this business cycle? Well, first of all, the job losses were even more severe during the Great Recession. They might have been shorter, but on a percentage basis, there were a much larger percent of job losses. We sent out a lot of checks to people in 2000. I think there were 2 rounds of stimulus checks. There was another round in 2020. There was another round in 2021. For young families with children, those 3 checks together could amount to $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. That's a lot of money to spend. People spend unexpected money in all sorts of ways. Sometimes they buy more things. Sometimes they buy more leisure and decide that one of the parents can spend less time in the labor force. And so I think that's also contributed to the increased severity that we're seeing in the drop in labor force participation. Unfortunately, that money is sort of already gone out the door. The effect will wear off over time, but it may linger here in the coming year. Obviously, COVID-19 is not completely eliminated, and that still is a barrier for some people in terms of reluctance to participating in the labor force. This isn't really childcare is another issue that's sometimes mentioned where individuals can't rejoin the labor force due to unavailability of childcare or concerns about sending their children to childcare. It's not really a labor force participation issue, but we've also had much lower levels of immigration in the country. And now because of COVID, earlier because of policy, And that's a factor in terms of the availability of labor as well. There's also some demand side issues. There's a number of businesses that are trying to bounce back and need to do a lot of hiring. That can be very challenging when labor force participation is down. Stronger recovery. We're having a stronger recovery after the Great Recession. I suppose the checks I was talking about earlier helped with that. But it also creates this problem of labor shortages. And there's also differences in the sectors that were severely impacted. So the COVID recession, the hardest hit sectors were not the usual sectors that deal with a lot of cyclicality. Manufacturing, construction, dealing with layoffs and hiring is a big challenge in those industries, but something that people are used to over a long period of time as the economy occasionally has a recession. The sectors impacted this time, leisure and hospitality, maybe have less experience with that and a greater challenge. Okay, so what are the implications of all this for Nebraska and for the Omaha area? Labor force participation rate may never fully recover. Again, part of that is because with the continued retirement of the baby boom generation, we were expecting rates to decline steadily over time. Instead, what we see them as doing is declining sharply in the periods in and around recessions, and perhaps partially improving during the expansion period. But we're in the expansion period now, so we do think there can be a recovery of some of this decline in the labor force participation rate, and maybe we can get half the people that were lost out of the labor force back over the next year. If you combine that with growing population, we do think there'll be a good expansion of the labor force in Omaha, and for that matter in Nebraska, many other parts of the country over the next year, or actually the next several years. Okay, also, who left the labor force during this period? So unfortunately, you cannot get this data at the state level. We did develop an estimate using available data for the Omaha area in terms of aggregate, the aggregate drop in workers, and estimate about 12,500 workers have left the Omaha area labor force as part of this overall decline in labor force participation rate. That is somewhat of an improvement. Earlier in the year, we were saying 14,000 workers have left. So we're getting some people back sort of slowly and steadily. But unfortunately, at the state and local level, we don't have any demographics in terms of who left the labor force. We actually now have data where we can compare February 2020 to September 2021 at the national level. So this data is provided by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what you can see is that the labor force participation rate nationally has dropped 1.6% for men and 2.1% for women since the month before the COVID recession began through a recent month, September 2021. So the first thing that might strike you is, wow, I thought, or I've heard that during this recession, most of the drop in labor force participation rate was concentrated among women. And actually, it's a little more even than you would have expected. It is more severe, obviously 2.1% is more than 1.6%, but it's pretty broad-based and not just for women. If we look at the drop in labor force participation rate for men, there really isn't much of a difference between, for example, white men and African-American men in the drop. And actually Hispanic and Latino men, if you look at ethnicity, the decline was less severe. If you look in the drop in labor force participation among women, it's a little bit higher for African-American women than white women, but again, pretty similar. The bigger difference is Hispanic or Latino women. But if you look at a Hispanic or Latino household, men and women, the men are more engaged in the labor force than before, the women a little bit less engaged. Overall, Hispanic households are pretty similar to white and African-American households in terms of their labor force participation. So it's a broad-based phenomenon, a broad-based retirement. Everyone got those checks. Everyone was impacted by the struggles in the economy and job loss. Okay, so we do a talent availability study that David Brown mentioned. and have some outlooks for the Omaha area labor force over the next year. So I'd like to summarize those here. So we do think that both jobs demand for workers and labor force supply will grow rapidly over the next year. We think of the 12,500 people who are remaining people who have left the labor force, we think about 6,000 of those can come back over the next year. And also growth in the population will help as well. We think that the counts of uninsurance claims should drop by another 36%. So in other words, if the count is 3%, it might fall, or 4%, it might fall to 3%. What this means is about 3,200 fewer people will be claiming unemployment insurance. So this all suggests some easing in labor shortages over the next year, but the broad-based challenges with finding workers will continue at some level. And as I said at the beginning, this has always been an issue for the Omaha area. It's much worse right now. We do think it'll ease, but will continue to be a challenge. In the Omaha area, because of strong growth in a number of blue collar occupations, we do expect the claims will drop faster for males than females over the next year, but it'll be at a similar rate for whites and African Americans, Hispanics and non-Hispanics. We'll have the fastest decline in claims in sort of the older part of the workforce, 45 to 59, but the slowest for the folks that are still in the workforce at age 65 and over. You can look at more detailed information about our occupation forecasts and our forecasts for initial unemployment claims and job openings, job generation. We look at over 800 specific occupations in all 10 counties in the greater Omaha area, and as well as breaking it down by county between men and women. We have a number of other breakdowns. You can find this detailed information at the website indicated here if you want to look at this information in more detail. It'll also be updated over the next few quarters as part of that project. Well, those were the main points I wanted to make in my presentation today, and look forward to answering questions that people may have.
Dr. Thompson, thank you for that. I appreciate that. A couple of questions that have come up in the chat and in the Q&A, and I'd remind our viewers to use those two functions if you got questions to ask, and we'll sort through them. The first is, are you seeing any trends related to work from home? We saw a recent LinkedIn report that indicated that Omaha was one of the leading cities for employees requesting remote work and employers allowing remote work. Are any of your numbers showing any indication of that?
We don't have any specific numbers on that, but I think that makes a lot of sense. Omaha is an economy that's specialized in financial services, finance, and insurance. Those are industries where there's just, by the nature of business, more potential for people to work very productively at home. And so it would make sense for more people to be asking and for more of their supervisors and employers to say yes. As we know, Omaha and Nebraska are very family-oriented places. People tend to have larger families here, so there may be more need to work at home due to child care responsibilities in this area.
I wonder how that might actually be reflected in the data. I mean, these are folks that, prior to COVID were employed, in this case, in many cases by the same employer. Now they're going to be still employed, but working temporarily. How do you think that number could get reflected in this labor data that we look at?
I think it shows up in what kind of industries and occupations you see the lowest unemployment counts. So if you look at professional occupation, if you look at the finance industry, that's an industry where the share of workers claiming unemployment insurance is quite low. The occupations that work in the financial services industry, the share of workers claiming initial unemployment insurance claims is quite low. I think that's the best way to see it.
Okay, thank you for that. When we were doing our research last year regarding net migration population numbers, we noticed a pretty large influx of foreign nationals that had really turned the tables, that basically turned Omaha from a potentially net negative migration to a net positive migration. Are you seeing similar foreign national numbers both across the state, and what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think Nebraska is a welcoming state for international migrants. Certainly, the Omaha area is a welcoming place for international migrants. The annual number of international migrants has been down in recent years, but I think this would be a favored place for people to choose. The other part of it is international migrants are usually very sensitive in terms of moving where the job opportunities are. And as we know, there's abundant job opportunities in the Omaha area in a variety of occupations. So more so than some other parts of the country. So that also, I think, is a big part of the draw. And you're absolutely right. If you sum up state to state migration, where sometimes, well, certainly Nebraska, but even Omaha might lose a few people. If you add that to international migration, the overall migration picture is generally quite positive in the Omaha area.
Right. Great. Thank you, Doctor. Have labor shortage impacted wages? I mean, we've all seen some numbers saying that wages are going up all across the country. I know they're doing it here too, but I'm wondering what you expect to see in 2022 with regard to wages.
Absolutely. I think there's a bit of a diversity. The strongest wage growth is in the moderate skill workers, the moderate skill occupations. That's also the part of the occupation distribution where labor force participation has dropped the most. So I would expect elevated but only moderate wage growth among higher skill workers. But the faster wage growth will be among the moderate skill workers. I don't like to use the term low skill workers, so but low skill workers too, if that's a term people are used to working with.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question in the Q&A about the experience of this particular question was people who are applying for jobs but not responding after scheduling interviews. Can you indicate any reason that would be happening?
Well, that's just that abundance of opportunities that are out there. So obviously, if you're looking for work, it's sensible to apply broadly, and if you're having the experience of getting an offer very quickly, you may not follow up with some of the people you interviewed with. Of course, that's kind of rude to do that, and people shouldn't. But human nature being what it is, people get busy. They may fail to let the interviewer know that they've already found another position.
All right. Thank you. So in a broad sense, what do you think this forecast looks like moving into next year for both the state and for Omaha?
Well, I think it looks good. Obviously, and I think this has been true for a long time, certainly true now, moderate growth in our labor force has been something that's held back our economic growth. We have good economic growth in the Omaha area. We could have even stronger economic growth quite readily if we had faster growth in the labor force. If we can figure out a way to compete even better with the other states, I think that'll be key. One big advantage Omaha does have is the state of Nebraska has higher birth rates than most places. We usually have a good cohort of young people, and that we have going for it. But we continue to, and I know people work on this very hard, continue to have a fight on our hands attracting workers from other parts of the country.
You know, it's interesting, Doctor, that we looked at the 2020 census numbers, and as a state, I think the state grew 7%, I think, over the last decade. But the Omaha MSA grew 1.2%. And that's actually 0.2% more than the prior decade for the Omaha MSA market. And when we started doing calculations where we needed the population to be by 2040 as part of our Omaha 2040 strategy, we said we really got to have about 1.3 million people in this market to achieve all of the labor force needs we're going to have in the future. And if we only grew at 1% a year and continued that over the next couple of decades, we'd end up a couple 100,000 people short. Yeah. The good news is that 1.2% decade, if that gets replicated again this decade, and once more, we hit 2040 pretty close to that 1.3 million number. So we've been able to ratchet up a little bit in the Omaha MSA, at least the growth in population over the last decade. And if we can do that even better over the next couple of decades, we might have that secret sauce that people are looking for, which is that ready and available workforce that we all need in our market. So we'll keep working on it. We'll keep asking you for your insights and for data. Thank you so much for joining us today again, Eric. We really appreciate it. We'll see you soon when it's barometer time and we start thinking about how we compare against other cities in the country. Thank you much.
Right, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, so let's get to the final closing comments here. I want to thank again our event sponsors, Access Bank, Baird Home, D.A. Davidson Company, Deloitte, Lamper & Earson, and KETV. The focus of this event is to provide you interesting and unique insights to help in your business planning. So we'll get you access to the recorded event, sponsor insights video, along with the copy of the materials mentioned through the presentation. And while we didn't hear directly from them, we do have some bonus insights from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Our friends at the Omaha branch are excited to provide you with information on bright spots in the Nebraska economy as we continue to rebound in 2020 from 2020, as well as some challenges that lie ahead. So we'll send you information about how to access this information in the post-event email that should be landing in your inboxes shortly. Lastly, before you go, I want to make sure you save the date for our annual meeting. It'll be held back in person at the CHI Health Center on Thursday, January 20th and 22. Registration is now available online at omahachamber.org/a-m. We encourage you to get your tickets today. So thanks again for being here today. Thank you to all of our sponsors, and thanks to our speakers for giving us really good information today that we can all use in our daily lives. Thank you. Let's go build a better future together. Enjoy your day. Time to go make some money. Thanks.